Oh fuck.
And we are back. Oh, look at. Well, I guess we're not back. We're not cutting this either. Vince, do what you need
No.
to do.
Do your thing. Do your thing. I'm listening.
And we are back with season 2, episode 8 of the Bottomless podcast. That is spelled BTTMLESS podcast. And we are 3 brown friends in our waning 20s talking about stuff that is interesting to us. To get into who we are briefly, I am Kevin, and these other 2 lovely people are
Leslie.
So
I tried to grab a mic.
Vincent's the third person.
Hi.
Vince is third person. I reside in Floribama. Leslie resides in Hawaii, and Vince resides in California.
Yeah. Also, can you guys hear that car alarm in the background? Okay, great.
No.
LA's like, it's like the rapture just happened. There was an earthquake this morning that like woke me out of my sleep. My power was out. There's been a car alarm going off for 7 days. Like, I'm in the fucking purge right now.
Actually, when Kevin was like, oh, was it because of the earthquake? I looked it up, and like that magnitude of earthquake actually happens all the time, right? Like you guys get tons of magnitude.
It does, but this was the center of it was maybe 2 miles south of me. And this is the first time I've been woken up by an earthquake. I usually sleep through them when they're at the night, but it was like very jerky. This one, like it literally felt like the building got picked up and like dropped. And I almost like I had fall asleep on the couch. I literally almost fell off my couch, and I was like, "Whoa, what's going on?"
Do you get actually scared, or are you usually like, I'll just reserve being scared until I actually know? Like when there's earthquakey stuff, since they're so common.
I've only felt a handful, and usually they're just more alarming than scary, but they're also usually more rolling, feeling like a. It's, I don't know how to explain it. Than like rolling, like a little bit of like a swing. It's not usually this like of a jolt. And I was also streaming, so I think it was just like, it was not a great way to wake up.
Well, the most important part of the story is what was your dream?
That is the most important part.
I don't remember, but it was definitely something
Don't
dystopian.
pretend
already.
to not remember. You saw the wheels turning, right, Kevin? Where he was like, let me just not.
No, he knows.
You guys retain your dreams that easily?
I go through streaks.
Yeah,
Like,
40 to 60%. I probably retain.
I don't.
Some of them I know I dreamed, and it's funny, I know that I forgot the dream, and then some of them are like incredibly, they have to be vivid and like pointed for me to remember that it was a dream.
Well, unfortunately, I don't remember this one. And mom, pause this or mute this for the next 30 seconds. Unfortunately, when you smoke weed, it's harder to retain your dreams. All right, mom, you may unmute this.
My mom ain't never gonna watch these, but if she ever do, because we get famous in 2 years when I got the Air Force, I'm gonna be smoking all kinds of weed with Vince.
Not letting your mom know when she's not even listening.
No. I'm gonna smoke all kinds of weed, do all kinds of drugs. I'm just saying right now, I'm going full Sherlock Holmes. Fuck what you talking about.
What is y'all's thoughts on that professor? I know Kevin and I talked about it briefly. That has been doing talks over the past couple months about the need for us to change our attitude towards hard drugs. And if I'm remembering correctly, he's not even just pushing to decriminalize, but to fully legalize all drugs. And it was controversial because he was a professor that admitted to casual heroin use.
Mm-hmm.
Did he get fired?
Vince would have to answer that.
I don't think he did. I think it just turned into like a media tour. I mean, I knew he knew what he was doing. Like he had a book that just came out, but it's controversial for obvious reasons.
Yeah. So what are our thoughts on legalizing hard drugs?
Yeah.
Both legalizing hard drugs and specifically, we'll just leave it legalizing hard drugs. I mean, the fact that a professor was talking about casual heroin use, I feel like that is a specific conversation in itself. But I think it's probably under, like, what does drug legalization look like?
You know, I'm going to pull the lame but true card, which is I'd want to hear y'all's thoughts first because I honestly haven't done enough. Well, the thing is, like, you know, we talked about, like, there are some things that are really fun to talk about when you don't know enough because it's like it's not like harmful or anything. And I could, but I honestly I haven't done enough research to have a good solid opinion on like hard drugs, you know, like in the abstract, I'm like very interested, like in
doing heroin.
I'm not saying that
Oh, I'm just kidding.
on this
JK.
podcast. No, but I mean, but I've also had people in my life who, and I'm sure quite a lot of people have people in their lives who have like really had difficult times with hard drugs. And, I think it's obvious there's certain reasons like hard drugs are not legal because they can pose a threat to the broader context of who you're around. So, but Vincent, I remember you did like a lot of research, right? When you moved out to LA. So like, I remember us talking about it. Like you were like very much like, well, I think this is bad. I'm gonna be the one to stay on. You're like, Leslie, I'm like reading and like da da da. So what are your thoughts?
On that specific, like, I haven't read his book. I did listen to he was on a podcast called Crystal and Colin Friends. So I heard a little bit of his story. I guess broadly speaking, I just think the way that we think of drugs, like what drugs are, is like inherently like based in politics and power relations, and like the idea that alcohol isn't considered a drug but weed is, like, this is pure politics. So at the baseline to me is that we should obviously decriminalize drugs. Like obviously
All
that would be
drugs?
all drugs, decriminalize. I think that's the most obvious first step because it changes it from a criminal conversation to a conversation of healthcare and addiction, which I think is much more nuanced ground for individual conversations of individual drugs. So I think, and also like Portugal is like the big country that gets pointed to, that they decriminalized all drugs, and like you saw a drop in addiction rates. And it's one of those things where you get caught, you get like a ticket, and you have to go through some sort of like healthcare situation as opposed to incarceration situation. So that's the baseline. I think that I hate saying just drugs because I really think it depends on the drug and the type of drug. But ain't nobody ready for that conversation.
Why not?
I don't know.
But I don't know if it would be
That's
fun.
like that's a subsequent conversation after decriminalizing. We have to get to there. We have to get the first base first. But yeah, I mean, I can be more specific about different types of drugs, but I'm curious if even to that point, you guys think similarly or have like a different view or framing.
Kevin, what's your like extent of looking into this matter? Like,
Vince, correct me if I'm wrong. Did Spain legalize or decriminalize all drugs? Is that Spain who did that?
It was Portugal.
Decriminalize or legalize?
Spain, decriminalized.
Okay.
Spain may have since then, but Portugal is like the example that gets pointed to when it comes to the need to decriminalize drugs.
And have you read anything on the effects of when they decriminalized, and like if it maybe reduced death or like abuse?
My understanding, I haven't read this in a while, like literally since probably less than I had that conversation, which was probably 3 or 4 years ago. But yes, addiction, abuse, death, you saw a drop in all those things.
So I just recently heard that, so I'm not like no research expert who's like trying to debate and be like, see, but like that plus like I think it's either Italy or Paris because of the drinking. I want to say it's Italy because of the drinking age. Like if you compare their drunk driving rates to like America's drunk driving rates, it's fun. So my take on decriminalizing and legalizing drugs, as Leslie knows, like I always take the stance that's gonna like not for the sake of shock value, but it's very shock value.
Kevin thinks drugs should be a required reading for every citizen at the age of 15 for your quinceañera.
Wait, but let's clarify what you just said, Kevin. What Kevin is saying is we've noticed the dynamic of Kevin likes to take a stance that is not necessarily absolutely what he really thinks. It's more like for the sake of stretching out the space for what can be a valid opinion. Like he likes bouncing to an extreme.
Yeah, because like.
So that being the case, what do you have to say, Kevin?
Like, no, because that being the case, like, I don't know. Like, I think I agree. I think all drugs, of course. Only hearing about the professor who lightly takes heroin, hearing that big artists like Michael Jackson and other people were using heroin to go to sleep. But that, of course, I was more in it's medicative, but I'm not going to say whether or not in Michael Jackson case it was abusive. And then there's instances when if you go to the hospital, they use heroin, of course, the equivalent or heroin to like sedate and relax. And then of course when you watch Sherlock Holmes, if you watch the Netflix series, like the two things that they're very clear about him using, which they allude to him being on a lot of drugs, because there's a doctor who tests tests him for drugs, and it's like all the things but the two things they're very clear about is cigarette use and heroin use. And it always confused me. And then when I heard that research come out and say what he said, I was like, oh, interesting. And I just noticed within the rap world and the artist world, certain drugs are a leading cause for death amongst rappers, like opioids or fentanyl, Percocets and fentanyl. So it's intriguing to me that Portugal legal or decriminalized all drugs, and that if what Vince is saying, the research reflects is accurate, that it reduced deaths and abuse and all these other things. I personally feel like these things should be decriminalized. And I like me knowing that some of the Christians I hang out with watch this, and knowing that my mom would never find this unless my brother, like being the nosy
I'll
motherfucker.
send it to her.
Send it to
Mama
her.
Ortiz has come up twice in this convo. I feel like there's something brewing in the back of
No. I mean, my brother's like fucking nosy, and he goes and I think he goes and finds everything about me for my mom. So I wouldn't be surprised if he found this already. And I've told y'all, like I'm very, especially with Leslie being the contrast, because we both have Asian parents, and there's like this dynamic of like within Asian families of like there's this power dynamic that I once I noticed with me and my mom, I've been bucking against since I could like speak and like have free thought. So I'm like wanting my brother to find this, and like, yo, Kevin said he's gonna. Oh, yup. Yeah, no, like I'm dead ass serious. When I get out of the military, I definitely plan at least experimenting with like. And I already smoke cigarettes, like, but cigarettes aren't they're legalized because you can, So my take on it specifically, because I use the artist card.
You do use that card a lot.
I do. Which is like almost like a man, this motherfucker. Like you can't say that for everything. You can't just. But on a genuine level,
Speaking
like
as an artist,
goes to get
speaking as a poet, speaking
goes
as a
to get
rapper.
the vaccine, and they're like, "Are you an essential worker?" And like, no, as an artist though, I'm entitled to.
I need this. No, like as an I think anyone. And this is gonna be I'm gonna start labeling them Leslie statements, like Leslie classified statements, where basically I
accept that I get my own category. Yes,
I say wild shit to like polarize. No, I feel like I feel like anyone who scoffs at the idea of not all drug use, like because of hip hop, I have a certain feeling about crack cocaine. Because of certain sitcoms, I have a feeling about black tar heroin, which I don't even know what difference between black tar heroin and regular heroin. Because of I have feelings. I don't even know about meth, but I have feelings about meth. But because as an artist, I look at life and go, like, you hear Joe Rogan talk about DMT or psychedelics or LSD or mushrooms, and you hear about these experiences, and whoever this guy was doing research on heroin. I think it's something that artists, if they want to and have interest or curiosity to use recreationally, and there's especially medical research behind it to reflect that it can be participated in a non-harmful way. And like that professor who did it, I want to say in very small doses. So you can participate in a non-harmful, non-addictive way, I think, if I understand correctly, the way they were presenting his experience. And especially for artists, if these things can like expand creativity, help access sources of creativity, it can help be a channel for which artists can dig deeper into creative spaces, then I just think it's funny that like anyone who disagrees with maybe not decriminalizing, but just who may feel judgmental or stigmatized against hard drugs, it's funny to me that they would have that opinion but will still want to enjoy art. It's like, go fuck yourself. Like how dare you? Like you have a couch in your house, you have like design, you have art in your house, you have like stuff in your house that's designed. Like you realize an artist created these things. You want your cake and you want to eat it too. You want this artist to produce something.
Okay, pause. What does that statement even mean?
Which one?
Of course, if you have your cake, you want to eat it. I've never understood that saying.
So like in that case, in the case of if I'm
Well, I know what it's meant to mean, but why does we use that statement? You want to have your cake and eat it too? Why would you have cake and not eat it?
I'm not, that's a good question. I always wonder that too. I think, and I could be wrong. We should look it up. Bottomless. I think the connotation, you never look shit up. I think the connotation is like, if you're at a birthday party, it's like the cake is primarily for, I mean, you get now traditionally within America. I mean, every birthday party I've been to, the cake, you get the first piece and then it goes amongst the people. But it's almost like if there's a cake, it's because you're already being celebrated and there's a party and like you're having your day and your moment. Oh, you want to have the cake and eat the whole shit too. You want people to come and celebrate you and to have a symbol of your celebration. And then you want to have, like, I'm not sure if the connotation is the whole cake, but it's like, man, you just want it all. You want both. And
that's
so, yeah.
it. I'm gonna break custom and look it up.
I just did, but I didn't know if I should tell you guys I did.
Damn.
I saw that you did, Benjamin. You were so obvious.
Y'all can't hold your horses. Y'all look at y'all. Look at y'all greedy for the stew, for the tea.
Oh, this is interesting.
Break it down for us, Leslie.
Let's see if me and Vincent's browsers brought us different results based on, you know how it like the algorithm makes it specific to you.
It's two totally
yeah. Or just totally different worldviews reflected back to us. Okay, the first thing that came up for me was the wiki entry, which is just the idiomatic proverb literally means you cannot simultaneously retain your cake. And once the cake is eaten, it is gone. So like have your cake as in like have a cake and eat it. That's actually deep.
That actually makes sense. Yeah.
That's actually beautiful.
Have your cake.
Love that.
Consume it and still have it in front of you.
Yes, that's actually so beautiful. I'm so glad we looked this up.
So that totally blows I can't use that statement.
But that was an intriguing like pathway you took it.
Yeah, I'm totally wrong. But I guess the thing, yeah, for the gist of what I was trying to get at was like, you know, like artists, Michael Jackson is the easiest example to go with, but many artists, Marilyn Monroe, who's the other one? Not Whitney Houston, Amy Winehouse. Like there's tragic stories of like artists using
Whitney Houston as well. Not heroin, but
yeah, but like there's tremendous stories, horrific stories of like drug use within artist life. And we commodify the artist, the person, and we buy tickets to go to stadiums to scream their names from stages. And then we have zero understanding on a relational level, like on personal level, of what they go through with drug addiction. And then they, like, a lot of them get like DMX is a very famous rapper who's in a vegetative state right now in the hospital, and there's like this big prayer rally going outside of the hospital from all his fans. But he got into a vegetative state because of an overdose. And so I personally stand on the stance, all that to say, stand on the stance of decriminalize all drugs. And I personally am going to recreationally use when I got out of the military, just because my artistic endeavors, I feel like my greatest responsibility to this world is to give the highest caliber of output I can artistically and creatively. And in my nature of like, I'll make the mistake first. I'd rather walk around with a bunch of scars than have done everything perfectly. I'd rather break my arm, break my leg. I'd rather do it myself, burn my hand on the stovetop, than my mom told me don't touch a stovetop. And I was like, oh, okay. My mommy told me, so I never did it. No, I'd rather go like walk around like, oh yeah, like that. So because that's my my personal artistic obligation. And then hearing how other artists have used these drugs recreationally to enhance creativity, I personally am going to indulge when I get out. So that's my stance. Like fucking, I'm absolutely 10 out of 10 recommend heroin for everyone and anyone. 3-year-old preschool, legalize.
And if I could just build a little bit for the theoretical person that's listening to this, that like maybe
the one like, person,
yeah, that think like drug equal bad, and like that's the extent of the conversation. To build on, I think, Kevin's appeal, I think it's not even limited to just artists, which I think is a pretty notable example. But I mean, you have a very I think it's a bit naive to think that these hard drugs aren't pervasive in other sectors. Wall Street, most of the billionaires you look up to. I mean, the history of like the military using drugs throughout history to keep people up longer than what's natural. I think the history of psychedelics as it relates to spirituality, I'm not, and I think like I'm not saying this to say that you should think that these things are in any way like right or good, but I think, well, actually, this leads me to something I texted myself last night,
Yes, I'm so glad we got back to our text to ourselves.
or maybe it was 2 nights ago.
Vince woke up from the
Let's see.
earthquake and he was like, I got it.
I was inspired. Well, this isn't directly related, but the general sentiment that I was thinking about was like an impulse to empathize before you moralize a conversation to get like a real understanding. And I feel like that's kind of like Kevin's low-key appeal is an appeal to empathize before we get to the conversation of is X good or X bad, to really understand the context in which X lives. And I think with drugs and like there's like the opiate crisis, and I mean like regardless of what you think, drugs are really pervasive, legal and illegal. Like it's artificial to split like alcohol or caffeine from those things in a lot of ways. Like the reality is that it's pervasive, and if we want to have like a serious conversation about like what a healthy individual looks like and a healthy relationship with drugs, I think there has to be more of a desire to empathize and understand.
It's funny. Like so to add on to Vince's point, I put everything when people want to have, I Leslie, for context, I yelled at Vince, JoJo and his wife for like 2 hours in a cafe in Raleigh during Christmas break over cigarettes. But the basis of my argument was like, almost everything is a mind-altering substance. Now, to the degree to which it can be harmful varies. Food, mind-altering substance. Sugar, mind-altering substance. Coffee, mind-altering. Technology, mind-altering. How many things are we going to list off that people participate in that's fat, grease? Like, okay, like Vince said, hypothetical person, let's have this argument. Let's take all sugar out of your diet. And when your body starts to shake in 3 days because it's having withdrawals, I'm going to go, no, sugar is bad for you. And mind you, like, you know, it can lead to diabetes and death, but to the extent and volume to which you use sugar, Leslie said.
She's bundled up.
It gets so cold so fast here. It's like just dropping down.
For those who are just listening, Leslie has like 10 blankets wrapped around her body like she's in an igloo. I'm sorry. So
it is literally one scarf and one blanket. Okay.
But this blanket.
No. Layers of blankets. She's actually sitting in a fort.
Come to the YouTube just to see Leslie bundled up. So yeah, I mean, again, I use hyperbolic analogies to try to bring the conversation closer to my side. But I just think it's convenient, the argument people make against drugs, and I think it's hypocritical. Because I'm gonna look at
fear-based. I think it's really
absolutely just fear-based, and that was my argument. Man, we're spending too much time on this. That was my argument with Vince, JoJo, and his wife in the cafe. I was like, the only reason you feel this way about cigarettes is because the U.S. I mean, everyone, but the U.S. government went on a propaganda campaign. I get it. Cigarettes are harmful. They are harmful. But like the only reason you're so big about cigarettes and not my fast food diet or my sugar diet or my sodas or technology or social media intake. Like the only reason people are so like if I have a cigarette, I literally have people who don't follow me on Instagram message me, hey, like, I hope that you stop one day. I pray for you. Like you only feel that way because like the government went on a propaganda campaign to like stigmatize and demonize and fearmonger. Like,
and on that note, I'll just go and say that I feel like, Kevin, you do like specifically smoking cigarettes as part of your aesthetic, like literally just for that reason.
Leslie,
like as part of your whole, let me just create the space. Leslie. Like not even because you necessarily want to be smoking the damn
no. Leslie, don't expose me and then bait me with like a 50-minute topic.
It goes back, both him IRL and his digital avatar. Shout out to previous episode where they're literally smoking in Rome.
What I will admit, like let me say this. Leslie's right. Let me let that sit for a second. To anyone who like,
let's just let that sit.
Leslie's right. I want anyone and everyone who like is like treats cigarettes like the boogeyman to hear me say Leslie's right. I smoke she's right. The aesthetic, now, and there's no but. Leslie's right, and the reason I told Vince and JoJo this, I said, hey, when I get out the military, I stopped smoking cigarettes because I can smoke weed. We know weed doesn't cause lung cancer or gum cancer or throat cancer. But I can't smoke weed because I'm in the military, and it's So
depending on how you use it, FYI, just in case you're listening, blah blah blah.
Yeah. So the reason I smoke cigarettes, and I'm glad my pastor hasn't said anything to me about it, because I know he knows. I know a lot of people in my church know. I'm so glad I'm so glad you guys haven't like tried to like talk me out of it. And whenever my mom does find out, like we'll have that conversation. But my argument has always been like, hey, unless every day you talk with the demons that I talk with and walk through the valleys that I walk through, like unless you were the one having to, this is like me talking to the hypothetical arguer who's like cigarettes. And I never say this to anyone, but my mind is always, unless you're the one fighting my suicidal thoughts, I don't want to hear it. But Leslie is right. So it's the stress, but I will say it's like a plus when the thing that I'm doing for this, like chewing tobacco is not a good, unless you're like in the country redneck.
I don't know. It's kind of a vibe.
Unless you're, I mean, maybe for chewing tobacco, but there's a clear, like, that's why these old 80s, 90s movies were branded with the cigarettes and not chewing tobacco. Like you're spitting, unless you're like the deep South, chewing tobacco isn't necessarily a vibe the way cigarettes are. So Leslie's right. It just so happens that my vice for my stress, so I'm not trying to justify with the stress part, but Leslie is right. It's just convenient that my vice for my stress happens to be fashionable. Mom, I'm sorry if you're listening to this, but your son will not stop smoking cigarettes until December 2021 when my contract is over. And Mom, when that is done, I will be moving on to marijuana. And
December 2021?
I'm sorry, 2022. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I have a year to change. So to everyone else who's listening, yeah, I will be transitioning to and marijuana. I'm 10 out of 10. Like if you're a Christian, if you're my mom, if you're watching this and you're like, maybe I'm 10 out of 10, not kidding at all. And like when I say like I'm gonna try to safely introduce, I'm gonna try to do the research, go behind, figure it out, like and look how you can like slightly dose it, and I'll pick my country of choice to where I can go and like take these drugs. Be Sherlock Holmes, like Leslie said, in the Parisian cafe, smoking my cigarette. Artistically, I'm so poetic.
Here's the thing, I'm curious. I don't know if maybe we need to like put a pin in this, because I don't know if you've looked up into it as much, and I don't know that much about opiates, but I do think a part of having a nuanced conversation is like the type of drug, like what's the utility of using it. And I don't understand the utility of doing an opiate. Like to me, I don't see any net positive. I think there is a case for like psychedelics. Well, I think there could be a case like
the professor said, like his focus, so like, for example, like fasting is a mind altering activity. When you fast, and this is a real thing, because I did it and I do it sometimes out of necessity, where I won't eat for 12, 14, 16 hours, 18 hours, a whole day. I've gone whole days without fasting. And I just thought it was like, oh, this is stupid. Like a bunch of Christians, and I did it for fitness purposes. But before fitness, I was like a bunch of dumb Christians starving themselves, getting miserable and irritable to like they can get closer to God. And then I did it for nutrition purposes. And I was like learning language at the time. I was learning Arabic. And it actually does sharpen your mind. It makes you more focused. Food does slow you down. It does make you sluggish. Even if you eat healthy food, it takes energy from your body to digest. Eating food is digesting, your body having to digest food and eat food is a very strenuous, exhausting process. So when you fast, if you get past the hunger phase, it's very mind sharpening. It's very focusing. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm not endorsing heroin. I'm not saying we should be, that was a joke, the part about endorsing it for everyone. I'm saying decriminalize, yes. And then this is my endorsement for drugs. But when I heard the professor who said he used it, Joe Rogan was explaining in this interview that like, he was like, hey, this stuff in the doses that I used it enhanced like my studies and my research and my ability to focus. It relaxed me, it soothed me. And so, man, if they have this research, let's be clear, like, moving over to psychedelics, they have this research. Dave Chappelle talked about it. The military for a long time tested psychedelic drugs on people because they thought that they were mind controlling substances. Like they gave, I think it was heroin. It was some kind of opioid. The military at one point, Vince is right, gave opioid or drugs to their pilots to fly longer, to the infantry to fight longer. Like these things were given dosed to people. Again, I'm the kid who's going to leap before I look. I'm the kid who's going to burn my hand on the stovetop. I'm the kid. I am not. If I'll do some shit I don't want to do because an authoritative person said you can't do this or you won't do this, you're not allowed. And I'll go, oh, thanks for the invite. I wasn't thinking about that. But now that you told me I can't do it, I'm going to go do it in front of your face as a fuck you to let you know you don't talk to people like that. You don't hold this authoritative thing over people the way parents do to children. But yeah, like,
Leslie, maybe I shouldn't have asked this question because Kevin and I could probably talk about this for like 3 days straight. I know we both have a lot of thoughts on this. So maybe you can have the last word if you want to respond. I'm curious. Like, as someone, you said you haven't really thought about it. Like, just curious what you think.
Just to be clear, what was the follow-up question from the initial, or just the initial question of now that I've heard your guys' like, because I do have some stuff I can share. I think that what's interesting to me about the idea of drugs and what was dangerous feeling to me before, when I was like, Christian, I probably could have still, not only, it's not like you have to like leave your faith to like engage more seriously with this topic of, I was saying, I think I could have remained a Christian and still done this, but it's like two-tiered, right? It's like definitely not being a Christian anymore created more space for me to think through it, but it could happen within the context, I think, of being a Christian. So I feel like what's interesting to me about them is viewing, accepting how much you are influenced by such basic things, which is a little bit similar to what Kevin was saying about like everything being a mind altering in some sense. Like accepting that I'm reading this book right now and it's talking about things that like feel like would not be surprising to anyone if you hear it, where it's like you can be primed by the most simple things. Like if you hear the word red, like, and then you're looking at a basket of fruits, like you're more likely to notice the apple first or to be able to identify, like that's a really loose example, but there are so many applications of that. So just accepting that, you're so influenced by your environment that is external and things you take in anyway. I like the idea of experimenting with different kinds of lenses that pull out how your mind interacts with your environment. But I think that probably, like, without having done any of my own research into hard drugs, like my idea of draw a line in exploration, like, would be if it seems documented that a drug has the strong likelihood to like permanently change certain things about how my mind functions and like how I experience the world in a big enough way that I like, that would be like, I don't know, I'd have to really think about it, if that makes sense, because certain drugs, it's like, you've heard, it's like once you do that, it can have really good positives, but it's like permanently there's certain pathways that get changed. And it's like, I don't know. And honestly, that very much might evolve over life. And where that kind of takes me, like my view on like whether I'd be willing to permanently change something, like I might in 10 years or even sooner be like, you know what? Oh, like, please, let's erase that. But that does take it down a bit of a darker turn where it's like, I can see why, even just projecting ahead, like I can see why people can go down really dark pathways with drugs, like not only with perhaps if it increases like propensity for paranoia or depression or anything, like I can see how if there's something that changes the way you're perceiving reality enough that it's not simply providing you new ways to contextualize what is your primary lived experience, but it actually starts to become like, I think there's, sorry, I know I'm jumping around so much, but I think there's something to be said for like, don't invalidate, like say, oh, well, they're not living in reality. Because it's like, if somebody, like, I think that we invalidate people's mind worlds and internal worlds, including as influenced by drugs, way more than we should, and we say like, well, it wasn't valid because they were on this drug or because they were in this state. And it's like, no, it was emphasizing different things. And it's always important to contextualize, but different context doesn't equal not valid. It's just like a different thing that's being emphasized out. But where I was trying to go with this thought was that I can see how it would take a really dark turn where like, it's less of a decision that probably relates to like what I think most people really want if they're healthy enough to want it, which is like joy and health and like the ability to have like longevity in life, and more just like a release of caring too much about those long-term things that if you're healthy enough, you probably want, So it's like, it's one thing to make a decision because you're like, you know what, I value this thing that this drug would cause enough that like, yeah, of course I want to live long life and all these other things, but like ultimately this is interesting enough, or this is whatever enough that like I want to do this. And it's different if that person is kind of worn down and like their mental health isn't great and like all these other things. And then like that's where the decisions are coming from, which like, you know, is the tough call of like, what is society's role in deciding for people, like if they can make that choice or not. But I do think in many cases, you know, like a lot of people end up regretting those choices they make in less healthy mental states of these experiments that you can't as much bounce back from.
Yeah.
So that would probably be my line, is like, I would never want to experiment with hard drugs when I knew I was not in like a really more healthy mental state, you know, where like, and I wasn't regularly having like anxiety, so maybe never. But JK. I don't know. Have you guys thought about it in that?
Yes.
Frame?
To cap on to what Leslie said, I joke with Vin sometimes, not a joke, about Percocets and lean. And so like to cap on to what Leslie said, Leslie's very right. Like the context in which we see a lot of these drugs used is I think typically the way we see it used is by people who might either A, be in a lower economic class because those drugs were pumped into those communities by outside entities, because how else do those drugs get there, or B, people with mental health issues and who may not, i.e. artists, performers, rappers, celebrities, who necessarily weren't in a lower economic communities but had access and knowledge of what these drugs did for temporarily for people in poor mental health conditions. So I do want to emphasize, like, if you notice, I didn't say, like, clearly I've done my research. I watched Joe Rogan podcast. I didn't say heroin or Percocets or lean or fentanyl or heroin's an opioid. But it was like, you know, like DMT or LSD or psilocybin, or it's like Leslie brings up the very good balance to my like parabolic point and my hyperbolic point of like, decriminalize, and it's like, yeah, no, like let me clarify, like artistic pursuit, but Leslie makes a very good point, like, and Vince, am I joking, where he's like, he warns me all the time, like, yo, I if anyone knows out of us, I'm in LA, like I'm probably closest to it in terms of how present it is of opioid use, cocaine use, crack use, like all these hard drugs are here in LA, and I'm so aware of poor mental health issues mixed in with hard drugs and just the recipe for disaster. So Leslie Leslie's absolutely right. Like there's a risk. It's not like not like me saying decriminalize is like there's no risk and it's like this. It's like, no, there's legitimate risk, there's legitimate death, thousands of death, a lot of death. And it has to be dealt with very respectfully and very carefully, just because of the fact that like that you could have someone who maybe has slight poor mental health issues or an addictive personality, and one small taste of a drug, and their life DMX, life, family, finance, well-being, loved ones. It wreaks havoc and chaos like a metaphorical tidal wave upon a land. It just ruins the entire. So I don't say this like lightly, as if I'm just like imagining no destruction, death, chaos, tragedy, bedlam, mayhem, like life devastating death, heart-wrenching mayhem behind it. So Leslie's Leslie's right. 10 out of 10, 100%. There's nothing I can say to negate. Like the cautions and the risks are all there. It's a very gravity heavy topic.
And that's me like sitting here thinking about it, right? Actually, go ahead, Vincent. Like, I was just gonna say quickly, that's me like thinking, like, I'm not saying I'm like, well, I don't even know how to say what I'm trying to say. Go ahead, Vincent.
No, I mean, I was just gonna simply add, like, but I think both you and Kevin are saying good points that can't be made if our understanding of this conversation is purely punitive and not a matter of like a collective decision, spiritual, emotional well-being, et cetera, et cetera. So many thoughts, but I don't know if we want to make this whole episode about drugs. And also the thoughts I have,
I mean, there's only 15 minutes left. Also, what?
The thoughts I have, I would want to lock behind like a paywall. I'm not sure if I want to how loosely I want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Maybe this is my own insecurity about the way I'm socialized to think about drugs. And I'm not saying that as like an appeal to like this is an appeal to coolness. I just think there's a lot of lived experience in both very positive and very negative ways that I think lend itself to the need to have such a nuanced conversation. But I think the specifics of that we'll put behind a paywall on Patreon. We need to make a Patreon.
We do dead ass. It just wild out and just wild. Yo, I was doing half the heroin.
Then you're saying you have a lot of specific lived experience?
Yes.
Or there just is.
And not necessarily just like via me using any hard drugs necessarily, but like Kevin mentioned, also just being around it and being around other people and like seeing different personalities in different settings. Yeah.
Paywall Poppy.
We'll paywall that.
Well, the other thing floating around in my mind was like spring. So that seems like a good segue. Hard drugs in springtime. How do you guys?
Yeah. Yeah. Love that.
Roll it out for us, Leslie.
She said have you guys seen that very inappropriate and offensive old Family Guy clip of the driver cutting across the freeway? Well, awkward because you guys are both Asian, but it's an old Family Guy bit where it's an Asian driver and she's like, I get off freeway now, and she just like rams off at the exit, and I feel like that was our transition just now.
Leslie, speaking of springtime,
speaking of flowers,
slow down. Oh, opioid, heroin flower, the poppy flower, spray.
Wow.
Yo, Leslie got bars.
You making moves while we making excuses.
Excuses. Roll it out, Leslie. Roll it out.
Well, I don't know. I guess I just like, when springtime comes, lots of times I think about how much like the seasons affect me, and I think they affect everybody. But I just love spring for like the super like overwritten about reasons, but they're like overwritten about for a reason, just watching like the new growth and the flowers and all the different kinds of smells, and like you can tell the weather is changing into like that state of transition. I don't know. I was just curious, like I've heard Kevin talk about the way weather affects you and like your mental health specifically. I know Vincent, we both love autumn, or used to at least at some point, but like I've never really heard either of you guys. Like I just feel like every spring, especially since college started, like I just feel this, like I feel like a flower, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's like so I was just curious like how you guys feel about it. Or if it really it's like a non, one of those seasons that doesn't as much, you don't feel that much when it comes.
Honestly, I just love strong. I like every season. I don't think I like love spring or any season more than the other, but I do really love specifically the transition to relatively warmer weather and then later in the year to relatively colder, which typically happens around this time of year, the springtime. I always get really, really pervasive nostalgia when I feel the weather changing. I don't know if you guys feel the same. Like I immediately get provoked to think about childhood memories of things getting warmer or things getting colder. So I like that transition period, but not necessarily tied to the specific seasons.
That makes sense.
I think with me, I when I was younger, I didn't understand it. Now that I'm older, and the Mexican culture has it right when calling Halloween the Day of Death. So from Halloween through February, like me personally, having a lot to do with sunlight.
Dia de los Muertos is totally different from Halloween, right?
Is it that same time frame though, like October?
It is. I think Halloween's like an offshoot inspired, like kind of inspired.
Yeah, so
but they're in the same time of the year.
That's what I meant. Like us and them coining it the Day of the Dead, and then us, of course, reappropriating that holiday to like dress up as whatever, and then hand out candy. Yeah, so like that, and I think it primarily has to do with sunlight for me. mental health, but also for like the energy that's in the atmosphere. So Leslie, I feel the same. When I got older and my mental health, I noticed deteriorated more with daylight savings in the fall and there was less sunlight. I used to hate spring and summer because of the heat, and I hate heat, and I loved being cold. And now, which is ironic, now that I'm in Florida, which I hate coastal states, now that I'm in Florida, when springtime came around, Leslie, which is funny because I'm more of a Grinch now than I was when I was a kid. When springtime and summer roll around, you're right. I was driving around and I was like a flower, like, like breaking from the tundra, like yes.
No, that's so funny you specifically mentioned that you used to love the cold weather, and then because it was the same for me. Like fall used to be my favorite season, and like I still love it, but like I loved the transition into cooler, and it was a certain point in college which definitely had ties into mental health. Partly also just because I weirdly like lost a lot of weight without trying, and so I got colder easier. But like then like it transitioned into spring, and it was like, whereas I feel like I used to sort of scoff at like, like, I mean, I liked it, but it was like, no, it's like, oh my God, I need this. Like, yeah, I need the sunshine. I need all the beauty of the earth bursting forth.
Because even nighttime, right? Even for, at least for me, even nighttime about spring is beautiful. Like there's this beauty in this, like the coolness of the spring or summer nights, and like I don't know, there's just everything. Whereas in the winter and fall seasons, when like daylight savings makes the sun go down at 5 or 6, it's just like a long stretch of depression because it's like these long spans of darkness. So it's depressing, and it's cold, and it just feels like tense and miserable for me. Even the things that are supposed to be dark and heavy toned about life, i.e. lack of sunlight in spring and summer, the nights just seem vivid and vibrant and beautiful. Like it's just a strange energy dynamic with spring and summer that I've fallen madly in love with.
No, it's that's actually the cold is something I've been thinking about since I got here, and I've thought about it so many times before, but like this is the first time in a while I've been like cold, and it's not actually that cold. It's probably like, it's
like 74 in that house, Vince.
But it is interesting how like living in a warmer climate, like moving to Hawaii, like it absolutely, like if the world is a playground and every time you step outside your door you have the ability to bounce around off of things, like cold, especially if you can't handle it well and if you're not like equipped for it, it really constricts like your playground. Whereas like just a constantly warmer temperature, like it's not only like you can stay out longer and do more things, like you don't have to do all the planning of what you wear, you can pretty much just always have like,
you can just walk out naked and you're good.
Yeah.
The real reason why we all love warm weather.
Barefoot, less clothes, freedom, like
yeah, it's so interesting because I feel like that's part of it too, is it's not just like the temperature. Like to me, warm and cold, which like that's part of why I also do like the cold, but it's like you have to be prepared. It feels like it's shrinking in, because like you have, and then you have to make the layers of like maintaining your little bundles of warmth as you're moving around within, and like the cold in between is the part you can't access those parts of like the playground. But then warm, it's just like you can do whatever the hell you want, and like yeah, you're right, even into the night, like just run around. So
which is funny because that's what atoms literally do with cold and hot temperature. Atoms, like when it's cold, they don't vibrate as fastly, and they get closer together and they don't move as much. But when it's hot, they expand and they move more rapidly. So like, and then like Leslie's right. I think the main point you're getting to is like the maintenance it takes to be able to do things in the cold,
just
like,
exist out in the world. Yeah,
high fucking maintenance. Whereas springtime, it's like, Vince is right, you can go flip-flops, no socks, no, if you're in a beach city, no shirt, board shorts, or naked, and just like be out until 3 a.m. and stumble home drunk and like pass out in bed, like belly full of In-N-Out, just happy with life.
I hear y'all. I do think there is something special too, though, about being in the winter and it cold, and then you arrive to a place where you get warm, like arrive.
Oh yeah,
to
it's its own kind of fun for sure. Yeah,
which
own
kind
I
of fucks with.
Don't paint us as winter haters.
I'm just saying, winter lives. Never mind.
No, I agree, but it's exactly what you said. It's when you get where you're going. So it's like when you get to your little pod that you can expand back out. It's super fun. Like, yeah,
Let's
it's
be honest,
fun
like,
experiencing some restriction, but it is restriction, right? Because like you
yeah.
get there and then you're relieved and like you're warm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Vince, I think you like winter. If you do, me and Leslie do. I think we do love autumnal and winter seasons. Vince, I think the reason you may, again, you love the
also I live in LA, so winter's a stretch. But yeah,
that's true. But the transition makes you said those transitions, right? I think the contrast. I think the spring and summer months spent makes you more appreciative. The contrast makes you more appreciative of the like dead ass. Let's throw your ass in Alaska and see how much you love cold and dark nights. Let's throw your ass somewhere in the North Pole in Canada and Ontario and see how much you're begging for the sun and shit then, and see how much you. But I do love fucking wind. But yeah, I was more like Vince, and now that I'm getting older and I need sunlight for mental health, when Leslie says a flower, I totally vibe. I'm like, yes, God. I need sunlight and energy and beauty and like blooming and smells and floral colors and all this shit and like pastel, all this shit with spring and summer.
Yeah, I wonder if that'll change when I move. Maybe I'll start to love. Again, I don't like not love summer, but I don't have like a specific affinity for it. I'm sure like my body does to an extent that I get like more vitamin D, but beyond that, I don't think I've ever
You're in LA. You're in LA where the temperature is almost consistent all year round. Like you don't have these huge spikes in winter. It probably never snows. In terms of
even back when I was in North Carolina, I think I didn't mind winter.
You're close to the beach.
Also was never depressed in North Carolina, so we'll see. That's why I said we'll see how it is when I move back to the East Coast.
Get to a place where you have like these strong seasons and like get to these, and then of course you're in a city. So how much I mean, you have nature, but how much nature do you actually in terms of like the changing of like a whole field or a street of trees that light up purple or light up yellow or orange or red on autumnal changes, or when spring comes around, they all bloom and those blossoms and even
I've been drinking it up here in California, man. Like, and especially like the mountainy type flowers, like when you're, oh my God, I really miss them. Like as beautiful as Hawaii is, like I just think the nature of beauty is variety. So like, you know, like getting to that, then again, see like mountain flowers and the type that grows on the West Coast has been amazing.
I will say this: when I was in Northern California, Leslie, you probably already seen it.
Wait, when were you in Northern California?
Is Monterey Northern California technically, or is that Central Coast?
Monterey's above. I think it's above. Oh no, it's right below Palo Alto, because Palo Alto is close to San Francisco, right? It's like to the
right. South Bay. Yeah, that's like hugging the bay.
I was 30 minutes below San Jose, and then I was an hour and 45 below San Francisco. So I would drive to San Francisco sometimes or San Jose for the airports or to visit or do stuff. And those trees, Northern California, and Steve Jobs said this in his biography, Northern California, I haven't been anywhere else in the world, so I'm just making a statement. Northern California has the most, in terms of energy, those are the most beautiful trees I've ever seen in my entire life. I've not seen more beautiful trees, better energy than in Northern California.
Which ones specifically? Like the piney ones, or which?
I don't know. I don't know. Not the sequoia, because sequoia is like those big redwoods, right? So not those. I kicked myself and I didn't get a chance to see those. I just know it's the highways you have to take from Monterey, California to San Francisco. When you get closer to San Francisco, and that's crazy because it's on the freeway, so it's barely the trees you even get to see. But it's just that region, like all the trees in that region are just, there's something there in the soil and the energy and the atmosphere. Those are the most beautiful trees I've ever seen in my life. Ever. Like, Jesus.
I did have a very romantic by myself dinner when I did training for my current company. I was up in Menlo Park, and I think it was in Redwood City, and I had like a per diem that I hadn't used for food for that day. So I went to this like nice fancy little house restaurant that was like up in a hill, and it was like super green. It was also very cold, but I was, by myself and like felt nice and fancy, and it was very romantic. Maybe the most romance I've ever experienced.
It's Northern California.
All right.
And in this episode of Vincent is Lonely.
Thank you for listening to the Bottomless Podcast. But actually, it's actually a good note to end on.
Yeah.
Happy spring to our listeners, and thank you for listening. And yeah, if you couldn't tell, this wasn't our most planned episode, but thanks for just hanging out with us. And
I feel like we've reached professional level. Like we had topics to talk about, and we literally didn't talk about. Well, we talked about one briefly
because
we're professionals.
Because I was across the highway.
you know, like that video clip of like a dog on a leash and it's running too far, and the owner like yanks his shit on a leash, and the dog was flying back.
That was us.
Leslie holding both of us on a leash. She was like, "All right, we're getting 2 out of."
Well,
yeah, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Bottomless Podcast. Peace.
bottomless.